If you're not mentally strong, please skip this video because I'm going to explain to you why the entire system from the top to the bottom is absolutely rigged and you have no chance to actually become rich. And I'm not saying this because I want to just tell you something bad, because if you have any kind of dreams, aspirations, and goals in front of you, chances that you will actually achieve that kind of financial independence is pretty much close to zero. There is a very little chance, but the vast majority of people will actually never make it. And I'm just going to say something like that. I'm just going to explain to you with charts and numbers and how the system is entirely designed. So if you're not psychologically strong enough, please skip this video. This is going to be a very brutally honest, harsh truth, and not everybody is ready for it. So let's get right into it. Now, if you take a look at how any city in the United States is designed, you will realize that it's actually built out of cities, counties, neighborhoods, streets, whatever you want to actually call them. And you have very safe neighborhoods and you have very dangerous neighborhoods. And it really depends. The quality of your life really largely depends on what kind of neighborhood are you living in. If it's a safe neighborhood, then it's pretty much great for your entire family because your kids tend to go to a pretty good school. There is a very low crime rate. The housing is pretty good. You have really good neighborhoods. Of course, house prices are astronomically high, but most of the good jobs are actually also located in the good neighborhood. And if you have a good job, you have a pretty good health insurance, so your health is great. On the other side, if you live in a very dangerous neighborhood, you have, now first of all, the great thing about it is that house prices are very low. But if your kids go to a school in a poor neighborhood, then it's not really the best school out there. Of course, I'm talking about the public schools and not the private schools. And if you have the money to send your children to a private school, for example, which can easily cost like tens of thousands of dollars, it can cost as much as a college, then why would you actually live in a poor neighborhood or a poor county in the first place? But of course, if you take a look, the vast majority of the Americans, you'll realize that they live in a dangerous, unsafe neighborhood. And when I say unsafe, I don't really mean that there is literally a war going on in that neighborhood, but you don't feel safe to go out. You don't feel safe to actually, you will avoid some of those streets. And if you take a look, for example, at a state like California, you will realize that it's kind of, it's mixed with some areas that are very safe and some areas that are very dangerous. I kind of drew it this way because it kind of looks, I don't know, it actually makes sense to a certain extent. Of course, if you take a look at the map of California, you will realize that it's kind of scattered all across the place. And if you take any other state, it's pretty much closer to that. Of course, some states have a higher crime rate, others are low, but crime is overall really great for the economy, especially when we talk about the United States. Now, think about that for a second. If we don't have crime, for example, then we don't have like dangerous neighborhoods or counties versus safe neighborhoods. And because we have dangerous places out there, the demand for houses, for example, in safe areas actually rise, and that means that prices rise in the first place as well. So the people who own the real estate in the country, they're pretty happy with that because their house prices are actually rising and their wealth, therefore, is also rising as well. Politicians also like the fact that we have crime as well, because what they can do is that they can tax these people more in order to make sure that their neighborhood stays safe. And of course, on the other side, you can make a lot of promises to the people who live in the dangerous areas that you will improve their lives and they will basically go and vote for you. And then you can also create a lot of jobs for the police who will also vote for you because you need a lot of police when you have dangerous areas over here. So pretty much, if you kind of think about it, crime is really good for the economy and for the people who want to rule the country. And if you kind of take a look at the numbers, you will realize that the vast majority of Americans literally have no chance to actually live there. And the plans and aspirations they do is that they literally lock themselves into so much debt, and I would say hundreds of thousands of dollars, in order to have a chance to move from this red area into this green area where they will actually feel safe. And it's not just about themselves, it's more about their kids, I would say, because if you're living, for example, in a poor neighborhood, then your kids are going to go to this poor school. And I'm not here trying to trash talk, but if your kids Now, especially like your environment has pretty much the biggest impact on your life. And especially when you're a little kid, especially when you're a teenager. So you want your kids to go to the school where they will have a pretty good environment. If you can't really afford to send your kids to a private school, then they will most likely go to a public school. And if they go to a public school in a poor, dangerous area, then chances that they will have a pretty good environment out there is very low. And that environment is most likely going to shape their future. And that's why you either want to you want to do your best in order to move out of that dangerous area into a safe area. So at least your kids will have a proper future if you're actually struggling financially in your life. And that's one of the motivations, or probably one of the biggest motivations. Now, if you take a look at the percentage at the household income people in the United States, you will realize that people don't really have the kind of money in order to move to the safest neighborhood out there. Like, just at first glance, if you take a look at this number, you'll realize that automatically the 50% of the population on the other side who are making less than $75,000, they have no chance at all. Like, for example, if we take an example of California, and if you check the wealthier neighborhoods in the counties, for example, such as Alameda County or San Mateo, the house prices out there are over $1 million. And if you're actually buying a house of over $1 million, and I mean, let's just say for the sake of example that it costs just $1 million. I'm not going to go into the details, but a $1 million house where you have to make a down payment of 20%, which is $200,000. I mean, think about that. How many years do you need in order to save to be able to afford a house, to be able to afford a 20% down payment, which is $200,000. If you're making like $75,000 and you're saving like $5,000, I mean, you could probably save, let's say, 20% of that money, or even maybe more than that. Let's say even if you're saving $20,000 every single year, I mean, you can do the math how many years you actually need just to save for the down payment. And if it's like an $800,000 mortgage, then you are looking into making something between $6,000 or $7,000 in mortgage monthly payments. That is almost $70,000 a year. So if you're making like $75,000, you have no chance to afford anything close to that. You have no chance to get out of the dangerous neighborhoods. Like, your chances is zero. And even if you are making like $100,000, you still stand no chance. I mean, probably the people who are at the peak here are making $150,000 maybe, but the people who are between 100 and 150, I mean, they have some chance, but that chance is zero. So you automatically have like let's almost 70% of the population, not 70%, that's like almost 85% of the population who cannot possibly afford to live in the wealthier neighborhoods. Not 85%, if it's like 59 plus 17, that is going to make it like 67%. Yes, let's just erase that for a second. Now let's have it. That's like 67%. So 67% of the population automatically cannot able to afford to live in the wealthiest neighborhoods out there. Of course, if you take a look at the house prices in the United States, you will realize that the median house price is around $400,000, probably more than that, like $430,000. But that's the median, and it includes everything, the poor neighborhoods and the rich neighborhoods and something in the middle. I mean, there's very little that we have in the middle, but overall, if you take, for example, a house that costs $100,000 and then you have a house that costs $1 million, you can kind of realize where the median is. So you're either going to purchase a cheap house in a dangerous neighborhood for a couple of grand, or you're going to spend $1 million that you cannot possibly afford. So even the people who are making almost $200,000 can barely afford to move to those kind of rich areas. And that's why if you kind of pay attention to it, you will find out that almost 85% of entire Americans cannot possibly move to expensive areas where it's safe, where they can send their schools to good schools, where they can actually afford a good job, and they will have therefore a good healthcare, because house prices on these areas are so expensive. But if you watch the news, you will realize that whether it is CNN or ABC or Fox News, it's constantly something negative is happening, and you're in constant fear that you might be a victim of those things that are happening out there. And if you kind of turn on the news and watch what's happening outside the United States, it's much worse. I'm not saying that the rest of the world is suffering, but if you watch CNN or watch ABC or Fox News, it seems like Europe is blowing up, Middle East is blowing up, Asia is blowing up. There are some great places in Europe, especially when it comes to safety. Most of the European cities are significantly safer than the United States, but that's not the image or the picture that you're actually portrayed, because that's not what the news actually want you to believe. That's not what politicians want you to believe. They want you to kind of believe that your only option is to move from here to this side. So how do you do that? Like, how do you move from the dangerous area into the safe area? One of the great options is probably the option that most people actually have it. They have to get out there and get a good job. And in order to get a good job, you need a good degree. And in order to get a good degree, you need to go to college. You need to go to university. And most people cannot possibly just afford to go to a really good college. You see, you can go to a community college, but if you're not in a really great area, that community college might not be really great. And that's why if you want to afford really good education, you probably are going to go and get a student debt. And that is the first trap they want you to get into. And if you kind of pay attention, the average student debt is around $40,000. And the number of Americans who actually have a student debt is around 42 million people. And some people might say, well, 42 million people is not really that much, because the population of the United States is around 330 million people. So 42 million people and 330 million people. Well, you have to understand that you can't really count the entire population. You have people who are under 18, and we don't really count them because these are not like working people. These people are still in high school. And then we have elderly people who have been retired, who are over 65. So if you kind of take a look at the number of employed people, that's around 161 million people. And out of them, 26%, which is 42 million, have a student debt. And on average, it takes around 10 to 20 years in order for those people to pay off their student debts. And the reason that these people are actually going and getting tens of thousands of dollars, and this is the average, like $37,000 is the average. Some people, of course, have less than that, and others who go and pursue degrees that are significantly more expensive, such as becoming a doctor or a dentist or an engineer, they probably pay significantly more than that. And think about that. You go to college and you get out of college. First of all, when you're in college, you're not paying your debt. You're literally just accumulating debt. And the average interest rate on a student debt right now is around 6 to 9%. So that is even more than your mortgage. The debt keeps accumulating. After 4 years of you getting that debt, you're getting out of college and you don't have a job, and you already have like tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And now you don't have freedom. You literally have no freedom. You have to go and get a job as soon as possible, because if you don't get a job and you don't start making payments towards your student debt, then you're in trouble, and that debt is going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And one day you simply want to have the ability to pay that off. That's why it takes people almost 20 years in some cases, and in some cases much longer than that, in order for them to be able to pay their student debts. And even if you take a look at the numbers, you will realize that 70% of all the bachelor degree graduates have a student debt. So 7 out of 10 people who are going and getting a degree are getting out of that university or college with a student debt. Of course, there is a 30%, but these 30% are probably the people who are going to community colleges. These are the people who might even go to community colleges in their dangerous areas, in their poor neighborhoods, for example. Now, nothing to say against that. I'm just saying that those dangerous areas are not the places where simply most people want to live in. And if they have the ability, they want to move out and they want to become rich, successful, wealthy, millionaires, billionaires, have their own businesses and just enjoy the life the way they actually imagine it. But the problem with that is that it actually restricts you and does not allow you to go and do whatever you want. You're already in this trap for you to go and get a job as soon as possible. And what do? Where do you go and get your job? You just spend tens of thousands of dollars to get this degree, so you need to get a job that will pay for that degree in the first place. And in order to do that, again, you have to go and get a job in a rich neighborhood, in a safe neighborhood, in a neighborhood where house prices are extremely expensive. And because you need to get And because you need to get a roof over your head, you can literally just sleep in the streets, you are going to go and get a job over here. And because you're getting a job over here, you are going to pay a hefty premium to be secure. And that means that the exact same house that here used to cost, for example, I don't know, like $300,000, for example, you are going to pay for the exact same house $1 million, maybe more than that, maybe $1.5 million. I don't know. And the reason you do that is because security is not cheap. It's expensive and it's something that lacks over here. That's why you're going to go and get a mortgage that costs $1 million. And if you take a look at all the houses in the United States, as of today, 60% of homeowners have a mortgage on their house. And if you think about it, 60% isn't really that high. It's like almost 50-50. That sounds pretty good news, right? But you have to understand that this number that we have right here is 60% of all the houses in the US that have a mortgage. That means that the people who are actually taking mortgage right now, the percentage of them is significantly higher. And I have statistics right in front of you. Now, if you kind of look at the houses that are being purchased in the United States, you will realize that only a tiny small percentage of them, which is right here, which is in red, is actually paid by cash. The vast majority of them are actually financed by somehow. So the blue color is the conventional loan, which is basically the average loan that you actually take. You go to the bank, you tell them that this is your job, you give them all the documents, they approve the loan for you, and you get that mortgage. But besides that, we have different type of programs that's offered by the government in order to help the people who actually need to get a mortgage. So we have, for example, FHA insured. This is basically insured by the government in some way. That's why their risks are low, which means that mortgage rates are actually low as well. VA guaranteed as well. It's kind of backed by the government agencies. So anyways, if you kind of pay attention, this is all financed by a mortgage. And there's a very tiny percentage of houses that are actually being purchased with cash. And these are probably the elites, the people who have money, the top 1%, the top 10% who actually have the money in order to buy those houses. And we are talking not just about some rich people out there, some kind of billionaires, millionaires, but also companies who are actually purchasing their houses. Of course, in a lot of cases, some of these companies are actually doing business. They're also financing their houses with a mortgage, but a lot of them are also buying just with cash if they can. So 90% of all the houses are being financed by a mortgage. So that's the second stage that you actually go through, because you got out of college, you already have tens of thousands of dollars of debt. Now you're going to a more expensive neighborhood or a county in order to get a job because you want to pay off for your student debts. But in order to live there, you are going to get a mortgage that is going to cost, for the exact same house, that is going to cost 3, 4, 5 times more expensive. So now you have a second debt. And that debt is going to last you probably like 30 years or more than that. Most mortgages are 25 years or 30 years. And now you have to make probably something between $5,000 to $10,000 in mortgage payments every single month, and you're already stuck in that area and you have no other option. You can't go and get a business, you can't go and do anything else. You must stick in that job and work really hard in order to pay all of those debts that you have. And of course, in order to get to your job, you need a car. How are you supposed to get to your job? Now, if you're living in a state like, for example, New York, where you have subway, then you might not actually need a car. But in most states, especially if you're in a place like California, then you must have a car. Otherwise, there is no other way for you to actually get to your job. Especially when we talk about something like safety, then you must have a proper car in the first place. And if you take a look at the statistics, you will realize that 80% of all the new cars are actually financed. And when you take a loan to buy a car, that loan usually is paid something between like 4 to 7 years. Really depends on the person and how much they're making and how much loan they have actually taken. So right now, you got out of college, student debt, a mortgage, astronomical big mortgage that you have to make, and now you have a car and you have to make car payments on your car. And if you have like 2 cars in your household, which means that dad and a mommy have a car, that means that now you have 2 car payments that you actually have to make. And the reason that you must get a really good job is also because you need insurance. If you know anything about American healthcare, that you know that if you don't have a good insurance, you're probably going to get bankrupt if something actually happens. You can't literally just go to the doctor and pay the bills. It's just impossible. If you pay attention to how much the companies are actually paying in medical bills because of those insurances, it's like astronomical amounts. So if you want to actually take care of your health, and the reason you cannot possibly leave the job that you have, because if you leave that job, what happens is that you're going to lose your insurance. And if you lose your insurance, you are going to risk your health. And if you risk your health, then you're in trouble. So that's another motivation for you to actually keep that job in the first place, because you need insurance. And if you're a family person, then you literally have no other option out there. So if you kind of take a look at how the average American lives his life, or the opportunities for him to get out of that, is that 85% of all Americans have no chance to actually get out of this paycheck to paycheck lifestyle, out of this rat race that they're being enforced to, because they have no other option. Because if they don't get out of it, like, the prime motivation for them to get out of it is security, is fear. It's not a joke. It's not like they want luxury. It's just because they want to feel secure. So 85% of Americans, here's how they live. Because if we take a look at the household income, you will realize these people barely can afford to live in the enough wealthy neighborhoods where they will actually have the security and the proper kind of a lifestyle. It's only the 15% of the population that can actually afford that. I think if you kind of dig deep into the numbers, you will realize it might be even just the top 10%, or probably even less than that. But this is the data that I have right in front of me. And you have to understand that even somebody who's making like $200,000, it's not like they're actually taking home $200,000, because they have to pay taxes. And the more money you make, the higher is going to be your tax bracket. So if you're actually making around almost $100,000 or around $100,000, yes, you are actually paying 25%. But if you're actually making more than that, let's say you're making literally $200,000, anything that you make above $182,000 is going to be taxed at 32%, which is significantly high. It's not like 25%, it's not like 20%. It's 32% of that money above $182,000 is going to go to taxes. So if you're making like $200,000, you probably take home something like $160,000, $150,000, maybe even less than that. I mean, you can do the math, of course. And suddenly you realize that you can barely make a $6,000 or $7,000 mortgage payment if you want to live in all those expensive areas and have the safety that you want. So 85% of Americans cannot possibly even do that. And if they do that, they have to go through this system where they will have to get a lot of debt in the process for them to simply live in safe areas and have a proper job so their kids can go to a good school. And the reason they're motivated to go from here to here is simply because they are afraid. They want to move out. They're afraid for their kids. They want their kids to have a proper lifestyle. So this is basically where you lose your freedom in the first place, because you have all of those debts. And you kind of look at this picture and you realize how harsh the reality is for the vast majority of the people, for 85%. Again, if you dig deep into those numbers, you will realize that number might be significantly higher than that. It might be 90%. It could be 95%. I don't really know. You have kind of to do that math for yourself. But overall, even 85% is significantly high. So you might ask yourself, why do we have such a system? Like, who benefits from this system? Like, who exactly designed this system in the first place, right? Somebody must benefit from this system. And the answer is very clear and very straightforward. And that's why rich people love this system, because it keeps them rich in the first place. First of all, rich people have most of the real estate in the country. And because you are motivated by fear to go from the dangerous neighborhoods into the rich neighborhoods, the properties they own, their value start rising because the demand for them is significantly higher. And that's how you have a lot of people coming out and betting for the exact same house. I mean, that exact same house in a poor neighborhood is going to cost a fraction of that price. But now, no, these people will come and they will bet in order to buy that house. Now, secondly, if you take a look at the stock market, for example, you realize that the top 10% of Americans actually own 93% of the entire stock market. Do you see the problem right here? You are here in the bottom 80% working super hard for a company that is listed in the stock market so that the top 10% of Americans stay rich. Why wouldn't the elites or the super rich or the top 10% love this system where you're stuck in this system in the first place? And if you actually think about getting out of it, you can't, because you're already stuck in all of those debts. You already have student debt, a mortgage, a car loan, and by the time you pay them off, you're going to be like 60 years old, 70 years old, maybe even sometimes elder than that. And if you talk to this person, you tell them, wait a second, how about you getting out and learning how to get out of it, learning how to invest in the stock market, learning how to invest your money properly. Maybe you are going to get out of this rat race, right? This person will not do that for a very simple reason. He does not have the time. He does not have the money. He does not have the resources. I mean, why would you actually go and learn about investing in the stock market where you have to work like at least 50 hours a week in order to pay all of your debts? And you're not even concerned about investing because you have so much debt in the first place. And you have kids, you have family, you have other expenses, you have other responsibilities. And whenever I talk to people and explain to them that the only way for you to get out of this system is for you to educate yourself first, have a proper path right in front of you, and stick to it. That's what the top 10% of Americans know, and that's why they just keep investing in the stock market. Well, the vast majority of people will never actually live the cycle of poverty where the entire system is designed like that. Not every country is designed like that, of course. Some countries have better systems. In some countries, safety isn't really that much of a big problem, but this is the case in the United States and in a lot of other countries as well. So start by educating yourself and start learning how you can actually break this cycle and finally get to financial freedom. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.